It's a common place to talk about the imagistic nature of Chinese characters. For instance, the character sun and the character moon came out of pictures carved in rocks. But if you place sun next to moon, you create the character bright. Or if you take the character tree and put tree next to tree, you create the character forest. A Chinese character can be an image. So for instance, the character autumn. A few years ago, I interpreted this character as tree tips on fire. And I say that because the character tree is there with the kind of upper stroke on top, which I interpreted as a tip. A professor and linguist at Nanjing University a few months ago emailed me and said, Arthur, I just checked the etymology of this, and you gave a very distinctive personal vision, but it's really plants on fire. And I think that's actually quite wonderful because it makes it more widespread than the tree tips. But there's that image. Autumn is plants on fire. One of my sort of proposals about the Chinese language is that it can accomplish metaphor through juxtaposition. So if you look at the character sorrow, sorrow is autumn in the heart and mind. And in classical and ancient Chinese, heart and mind are the same written character. Similarly, the word to think is to put your heart or mind in a field. But not all Chinese characters break out so easily. In fact, probably only 10% of the language does that. And most Chinese characters have a radical plus a phonetic element. So if you look on the right side, there's work, pronounced gung, and the word empty, pronounced kung. So there's really a phonetic element there. And if you just wanted to read it in terms of image, you would probably go haywire very quickly. I need to show you that there are 4 tones in Mandarin. There's a level, a rising, a dipping, and a falling tone. And the Chinese characters have those tones built in. So ma, 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 ma mean mother, hemp, horse, and to yell at someone, respectively. I picked this poem by Wang Wei because I've never talked about it before, and also it's a poem that isn't often included in anthologies, and I do think it's one of his great poems. In terms of the sound, let me say that in classical Chinese, the first and second tones are fairly close, and they're called level sounds, and the third and fourth, with the dip and the dropping tone, are inflected tones, and generally in classical poetics you'll draw a horizontal or a vertical line. So if you look at the tonal mesh or the tonal weaving in this 20-character poem, in the first 2 characters you have a horizontal and a vertical tone, a vertical and 2 horizontal tones. And then the second one, the second line I've drawn out for you is 2 horizontal tones and then a vertical, horizontal, vertical tone. But what I wanted you to see was lines 1 and 3 are identical in terms of their tonality, and lines 2 and 4 are identical in their tonality. So one of the things Wang Wei is doing is weaving with sound, and that's of course impossible to translate. The other thing I'm trying to do to keep you close to the feel or movement of the original is to give you a cluster of words under each Chinese character. I like to think of it as a field of energy. So in very fragmented fashion, you have something like sir, you, self, naturally, personally. Then there's a caesura, a pause. Old home, ancient country, come or coming from. And then the second line, presumably a you. Ought, must, or should know or perceive. The old home or ancient village, thing, things, affair, affairs. Come, day, arrive, sun, sunrise. And then this very special character, which the Matthews Classical Dictionary translates as open work, variegated, thin silk. Very, very specific, textured. How are you going to translate something like that? Window, curtain, before, front. And the last line, cold plum or plums, display or open, blossom, flower, flowers, no, not yet, question mark. It sort of puts it into question. I want to call your attention to what's called parallelism. So old home, ancient country, you can see that in the first line. It's in the same position in the second line. But what you might not notice so obviously on a first looking at this poem is the word come at the end of the first line reappears at the beginning of the third line. And so the symmetry is actually broken. And I want to point out that in the first instance, the come has to do with place. There are two people talking, and the speaker turns to this friend. It's kind of like usted in Spanish. It's a respectful you. Sir, you, naturally, you come from my old home. So it's coming from a place. But in the third line, it's now time. And that's quintessential Wang Wei. When the sun comes up, in that particular moment of day, in front of or by where this window is, there's a kind of thin silk mesh, and there's a cold plum. And now, of course, if the sun is rising, then the heat of the day is beginning to approach. And is there enough warmth for that cold plum to open up its flower and blossom or blossoms? The poem becomes even more powerful when you realize its wider context, which is that it was written right after a period of civil war and civil strife in China. And for a lot of Western readers, there might be a temptation to read it with irony and think maybe the whole tone is ironic. But usually for classical Chinese readers, this is read as a kind of Chan or Zen reading, meaning the speaker of the poem is turning to an old friend who comes from this village that the speaker grew up in, and instead of asking about what happened to this home or my family or your family or the people there, all he wants to know is, did this cold plum, when the sun came up, did it open its flowers or not? And in that motion, in that image, the whole history and the whole story of the village is there. So classical Chinese does this amazing kind of compression and oftentimes uses the image as a vehicle for emotion. This is 20 characters. It's the shortest poem and form that exists in classical Chinese poetry. It's called a juezhu, which is like a cutoff. My spoken Chinese is very awkward and rudimentary, so I'm only going to read you the first line, but you can get some idea of it. Ginsu gu shang lai. So it's very, very spare. There's two characters, a pause, and then three. So there's a kind of symmetry and asymmetry. There's a kind of dance going on. And one of the wonderful things about this is the way the mesh works, but that focus on that open work, variegated, thin silk window, there's a lot of pressure being put there. And then also that image of the cold plum. And why is that plum cold, emotionally cold? And is the sun warm enough or going to bring enough warmth for that plum to blossom? So here's my very short translation. And interestingly, Wang Wei chose not to title this poem. Every other poem of his that I know of has a title, so it's not a coincidence. Untitled. Sir, you come from my native home and should know the affairs there. The day you left, beside the silk-paned window, did the cold plum sprout flowers or not? Here's an early poem of mine called The Moment of Creation. A painter indicates the time of day in a still life. Afternoon light slants on a knife, lemons, green wine bottle with some red wine. We always leave something unfinished. We want X, and having X want Y, and having Y want Z. I try to sense the moment of creation in the shine on a sliced lemon. I want to connect throwing gravel on mud to being hungry. Eat, a man from Afghanistan said, and pointed to old rotting apples in the opened car trunk. I see a line of men dancing a cloud dance. 2 women dance intricate lightning steps at either end. My mistakes and failures pulse in me even as moments of joy, but I want the bright moments to resonate out like a gamelan gong. I want to make the intricate, tessellated moments of our lives a floor of jade, obsidian, turquoise, ebony, lapis. That kind of a poem, that early poem, is really inspired by the Tang Dynasty models. I was really looking for this idea of an artifact. In Western poetry, you would call it the well-wrought urn, but this idea of a gorgeous work of art. And Tang poetry is really great at doing that. Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, in their very different ways, compress these visionary worlds into very few characters and spare language.